Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today I had the honour of speaking with one of my heroes, Gerald Pollack. Jerry is a world-leading authority on water. He has had a fruitful career with backgrounds in electrical engineering, muscle physiology and water. He has written dozens of peer-reviewed journal articles and several books including Cells, Gels and the Engines of Life, as well as The Fourth Phase of Water, where he eloquently outlines how water undergoes phase transitions to generate energy, as well as drive cellular functions. Jerry is an open-minded and inquisitive scientist who refuses to let dogma and bias interfere with his work. I had an amazing time getting to talk to him today about many interesting topics like cellular energy, rethinking basic biological principles, weather, as well as discussing their implications. With that being said, I hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks for coming on today, Jerry. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I guess I just wanted to get a little bit of a background on your career and how you ended up studying water of all things, and maybe if you could give a little bit of information about what you're currently studying, that would be awesome.
So you've got three questions there. Which one should I answer?
Let's get a background on your career. I'd love to know where it all started.
It started when I was studying electrical engineering as an undergraduate student, and I then went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and by some coincidence, had nothing to do with my interest now, the chair of the department and other faculty members in the department had interest in water. And for me, it was so boring that I couldn't wait to get away from any of the lectures. They were talking about bound water, that is water that's bound to macromolecules and such. And I couldn't understand why that might be important, nor could some of the other students there. There weren't too many who were really enthusiastic about the subject, and that's not how I got started. I was doing my graduate work in the area of muscle contraction, and I started my career at the University of Washington in Seattle, studying muscles. I was really curious how muscles work at the molecular level. I was in that field exclusively, pretty much for a period of 2 decades, maybe 2.5 decades. It was incredibly interesting for me. I thought we made important contributions. Few people had any interest in listening to what we had to say. And I came to realize after a while, it was not that what we said was wrong or insignificant by any means, but it was just it's kind of the way science was, that if there was a prevailing theory, which there was, and still is, and the theory is put forth by someone who is important, significant, and the person was Sir Andrew Huxley, member of the famous Huxley family, Nobel laureate, president of Royal Society, master of Trinity College, Cambridge. You know, when he walked into the room, it was as though God walked in. It was a hush. And if you're in the field of muscle contraction, trying to figure out how the proteins interact with one another to generate force and motion, and you've got two choices. One is to follow the leader, that is Sir Andrew Huxley, and the other is to find yourself interested in some alternative views, of which there were actually quite a few, because the theory has so many problems. And so most of the people were perfectly happy being anointed by Sir Andrew Huxley and such, and not so interested in finding out about an alternative point of view. I'd gone so far as to have written a book on muscle contraction, published in 1990, in which I explained why I saw the evidence as in total, absolute disagreement with the prevailing theory, which still prevails, by the way, changed very little in the past 60 or 70 years and accepted by almost everybody. That was my goal. And the book, I noticed when I visited my colleagues, was on practically every shelf, but nobody read it because nobody was really interested in seeking. Well, I like seeking truth, but maybe that's a bit of a harsh statement because I think many scientists feel that they are pursuing truth. But it didn't get anywhere, and it's not why I left the field at all, because I was enjoying myself. There were lots of students in the lab. It was an exciting place, and my students were getting jobs in different laboratories. But one day, by some coincidence, by some quirk, a fellow was coming to work in my laboratory from Hungary. I picked him up at the airport with his wife, including lost baggage. And we started chatting in the car, and he was telling me, he said, Jerry, this was a guy who was senior to me in terms of age. He said, there's a guy who passed away a couple of years ago in Hungary. And there's a symposium to honor him, a famous biophysicist, and you should go. Why should I go? Well, there were two subjects that interested this guy. One was muscle contraction, and his ideas differ from the mainstream ideas, and you could be there to represent the field of muscle contraction. And there's also, his other field was water. And there's a guy there, a pretty famous guy, his name is Gilbert Ling, and he's going to be there to represent water. So I thought, okay, what do I have to lose? A nice trip to Hungary. It turns out that my family origin generations ago was actually in that region of Eastern Europe. So it was another reason to go and visit. And I'd heard of Gilbert Ling before because he was pointed out to me. He had been working in Philadelphia where I was studying. And I remember sitting at a dinner table once. It was a banquet. And a fellow graduate student was sitting next to me. And he said, hey, Jerry, look, three tables over, there's that guy, Gilbert Ling, that crackpot. He had some really weird idea. He has some really weird idea that the water inside the cell is nothing like this kind of water that's sitting here. He said, this guy thinks that the molecules are all lined up and organized, kind of like soldiers at attention. He's a weird guy. And it was way out of any context at all. And I remember it to this day because it's rare that somebody will be sitting next to you and will point out several tables away about a guy who was kind of thought of as weird. And as I said, it happened that my department had some interest in water, and so there was a kind of connection there. But so anyway, I knew about Gilbert Ling, and that gave me even more incentive to go there. So I went to this conference. I presented my stuff on muscle contraction, seemed to have been received okay by those people. And then Gilbert Ling presented his work, and it was not just his work that was presented, but also the work of a dozen other people who'd come to the conference to present their work in support of Gilbert Ling. And I met those two, and I came away terribly impressed. I saw that Gilbert Ling had cogent arguments to present in terms of his point of view. And I saw that the evidence that was presented by others fit very nicely into his point of view. And so we kind of all became friends a bit. And I came back to Seattle. I'm scratching my head and thinking, my goodness, I'm in the field of muscle contraction and nobody ever mentions water. But water, 2/3 of every muscle is water by volume. But if you do it by molecular count, as you know, I see your smile on your face. It's people don't know this, but if you start counting the number of molecules, more than 99 out of 100 of them are water molecules because they're really small. And to fit in, to make up that 2/3 volume, you need a lot of them. So, and I'm thinking, this is really weird because the people in the field, including Sir Andrew Huxley and pretty much everybody else in the field, they presume that water is just not there, that the muscle proteins are acting in an environment that's pretty much like a vacuum. The water molecule, 99 out of 100 molecules don't do anything. They just sit there like the bath water that you sit in if you're taking a bath, you know, they just surround you, but they don't really do anything. It's not quite true in the bathtub, but it's a different story. And you know, it occurred to me that's really strange. It shouldn't be the case. How does nature put 99 out of 100 molecules there simply to do nothing? A bit of a touch of arrogance in that point of view, that water, you know, and even I myself had been thinking of water, not thinking of muscle, not in terms of water, but this really created an awakening. So I gave one of Gilbert Ling's books to some of my, shall we say, more astute students, and every one of them came back to me with a similar comment. This is incredibly important. If this guy's right, everything else is wrong. I mean, it changes just everything in biology and maybe even beyond biology. So those students supported my point of view, and I'm scratching my head thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? And my first thought was, I need to move the laboratory in this direction because this is so important that if it's true, we got to study it. And so we began studying it, and we found a lot more that I never could have dreamed of. We found that Gilbert was, I think, not exactly right. It was on the right track, as were some others even before Gilbert Ling. But also I decided to write a book. And the book was, it still is, called Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. It was 20 years ago. It was our first incursion, my first incursion, whatever, into the idea of water and the cell. And I wrote it with the intention of popularizing Gilbert Ling's points of view, because Gilbert Ling was not, he passed a year ago, just shy of 100 years old. He was not the world's best or clearest writer. And I knew that I could present his ideas in a way that was understandable to dummies like myself, you know, because Gilbert Ling stuff is very difficult to penetrate. You need to know something about physical chemistry, and you need to think what Gilbert must have been thinking when he wrote that sentence, and doesn't quite hang together. But and so I did it, and the book received mixed reviews. Some people thought or commented, "Oh, this is Gilbert Ling again. This is the same stuff rehashed, and we all know that Gilbert Ling is a crackpot, and so forget the stuff." To at the other end of the spectrum, comments like from famous cell biologist from Harvard University. It must be right if he's from Harvard University, right? So, and he wrote, "This is a 305-page preface to the future of cell biology." That one I liked, and so. Yeah, and so that's basically how it all started. And immediately, I was so curious to begin studying water and studying the ideas of Gilbert Ling and on from there. And that's when we started. And that was about 20 years ago. We started in my laboratory doing experiments, expropriating the money that was given to me by the National Institutes of Health to study muscle, and we used it surreptitiously to study water. And that's how it all began. So it's a long response to a short question.
No, I love it. I love it. You just mentioned cells, gels, and the engines of life. I read The Fourth Phase of Water first, and I thought that blew me away. And then I read Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life, and that sort of really knocked my socks off, because it sort of threw everything that I'd learned about cell biology, particularly about the membrane, out. Because you talk about how Gilbert did all this work showing that if there was a pump for everything that we were discovering there needed to be a pump for, there'd be no energy left to run the cell. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I was just wondering how is a cell sort of going through its motions if the membrane isn't embedded with all of these pumps and integral membrane proteins that transfer things, these minerals in and out. Where's the energy coming from?
Good question. Actually, great question. Where's the energy coming from? And I'm trying to think of where to start, because I suspect that people who are watching are not familiar with the developments that came after Gilbert Ling that have come from our lab, which is really the subject of the fourth phase of water and beyond. And so in order to explain where the energy comes from, I need to step back a few steps and say a few words about what Gilbert Ling called structured water and what we call fourth phase of water, or exclusion zone, EZ. You say EZ, I think. It doesn't work. It's easy to remember. So I need to step back because it comes from, I think, a lot of it. How much, I'm not sure, comes from there. And so let me just step back. And if I go off track, please, if I get derailed, please rail me, because I do have a tendency to do that. Okay, so we found that when water meets, if you take a container of water and you put a blob of material in the water, let's say a gel, something like ordinary gel in dessert, for example, and you put it in, what happens is that the water molecules that are adjacent to the surface of the gel, the first molecular layer, when it meets the surface of the gel, it undergoes a radical transformation from individual water molecules that are bouncing around a fierce number of times each femtosecond. And what happens is that they undergo a transition and become an ordered array, a single molecular layer of molecules. And that array is actually hexagonal. If you to look at this sheet of water that forms from this direction, you'd see a honeycomb, basically tiny little hexagons lined up with one another, very well ordered. And then what happens is this ordered array of hexagons serves as the nucleation site for the next layer of water forming hexagons, and the next and the next. So what happens is that these layers build one by one, starting at the surface and creating this special different kind of water, which we refer to as the fourth phase water, or we sometimes refer to it as I said, exclusion zone, because as it builds, it's a pure crystal. And crystals, as they build, they push out everything else that had originally been in the water, because otherwise it wouldn't be pure. It's like a glacial moraine. At the bottom of the glacier, you find all the junk that's been pushed out as the ice forms. And this is not so different from that. It's not ice, but it behaves in somewhat the same way. The consistency is more like as a gel-like or highly viscous, maybe something like honey. So anyway, so you've got this layer that grows, and it turns out if you look at the structure of this, it's not H2O anymore. It's actually H3O2 if you count the number of hydrogens and oxygens that are in it. And it turns out through measurements, this is not conjecture, we actually measured, we found that typically this zone, exclusion zone, EZ, fourth phase, has negative charge. And the region beyond has equal and opposite charge, positive charge. So you have something that's like a battery, negative charge in first region, in the easy region, fourth phase region, and positive charge. That's a battery. Now, batteries contain energy. In order to build this battery to start with, I need to mention, you need to put energy in, just like your cell phone. If you forget to plug it in at night, battery is not going to be charged, your phone won't work. I don't have to worry about that because I have no cell phone. So it's no problem for me, but it's a problem for you. And I'm sure you forget. So you need energy. You need energy to do two things. First is to separate the charge as the easy builds. And secondly, to create order. Creating order from chaos always requires energy. So you're putting energy in. And we found out through experimentation, actually through serendipity to start with, it was a young undergraduate student who discovered this, that the energy for doing all these wonderful things comes from light, and especially from infrared light. And that is, light whose wavelength is just beyond red, red being the longest wavelength in the visible spectrum. But of course, there's light that goes beyond the visible, and it's infrared light, which is roughly not exactly equivalent to heat. So, like if you got the toaster on, you can see the red coils or orange coils glowing, and you say, "Oh yeah, it's hot and it's generating infrared." But infrared is all around, all the time, and so infrared is the energy that's used to create this separation of charge to give you this battery-like effect. Now, the key point is you've got this water inside your body. Your cells are absolutely filled with easy water. That is the kind of water that fills your cells. And, we discovered that through various pieces of experimentation and work by others. And so your cells are negatively charged, and that negative charge comes from the fact that your cells are filled with easy water, which has negative charge. It's a very simple kind of relationship, and but your listeners might not know that the usual explanation for that does have to do with the pumps and the channels, the putative pumps and channels in the membrane. I say putative because it's not so clear that they really do what they're supposed to be doing. It's not just the pumps, but it's the channels as well. And so if that is not the reason why the cell has net negative charge, then there must be another reason. And the simplest reason is, it's almost like kindergarten sort of reasoning. The cell is filled with easy water. Easy water has negative charge, and therefore the cell is negative. So that negative charge carries energy. You imagine a cell, and it's filled with all those negative charges, and they repel each other. They want to get away from each other, and that the tendency to want to move away is potential energy, the potential to do work. Or looking at it another way, you've got negative charge inside, positive charge outside. It's kind of like a battery, and that battery is capable of doing work. So it's a long roundabout way of saying, answering your question. And your question was, where does the energy come from to run your body and my body? And at least some of it, I believe, comes from electrical energy, which comes from the easy or fourth phase water. And this is elaborated in the other book that you mentioned called The Fourth Phase of Water, which seems to have become rather popular. So to answer the question, but if you read a standard textbook on cell biology, you'll read something completely different from that, and it will tell you that it all comes from the high energy bond contained within ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so this high energy bond, in theory, is used to power essentially everything our body does. There's one little problem with that remains unresolved, and it's one that Gilbert Ling talks about talked about in his various books. And I think his website still exists, gilbertling.org. I hope it still exists. I hope that somebody is running it. And he talks about an interesting observation. So it was many years ago, maybe I think 70 years ago, that some chemists discovered that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that one of those phosphates has a so-called high energy bond. So that's chemical energy. And that chemical energy is then theorized to be used in all different ways to run the machines of our body. Basically, you need energy, and that's where it comes from. And that became popular very quickly, that idea, because prior to that, there was no understanding of where we get our energy. And so the idea that we get our energy from ATP was a popular one. However, Gilbert points out that 1 year later, some physical chemists wrote a paper, an extensive paper, suggesting that that's wrong. These guys made a mistake, a simple arithmetic error. There is no high energy bond in ATP. Gilbert Ling proposed a different role for ATP, which we didn't go into at the moment. It's tangential for your question. So the question remains unresolved. Unresolved in my mind, and unresolved in perhaps the minds of some others, because apparently nobody has taken up that objection. Nobody has said, yeah, I read the original paper and I read the objection, and the guys who objected are right, or the guys are wrong because they did X, Y, Z. It remains a question. And almost nobody is willing to address the question, because the idea that ATP is responsible for all the energy in our cells, in our body, it's sacred. It's become absolutely sacred. And so when it's sacred, it's not easy to question concepts that have become sacred, that are in literature and are accepted by generations of people. But it's not clear whether it's right or whether it's not right. And it needs to be addressed, seriously addressed, by somebody who has the capability of doing it. And at the same time, I would like to suggest that if it turns out that ATP does not contain that energy, or maybe contains some energy, but not all that much, there is this other source of energy that I've been talking about, and that is the electrical energy that comes from water. It could represent a small fraction of the energy that we use, a modest fraction, a large fraction, or even conceivably all. I wouldn't go that far because we don't have the evidence for that, but at least some. So, again,
if you had to guess, how much do you think is coming from the water battery?
Oh, you put me on the spot. Usually, let me put it this way. You're familiar with Occam's razor, the principle? Yeah. You got two ideas. And the simplest one is the one that's likely to be valid. You might say there's a corollary to it, and that is usually there's one mechanism, not two mechanisms. And usually it's the simpler one. I think the electrical one is so simple. It really, all it involves is the breakup of a water molecule into plus and minus, and they self-organize in this way, and they use the energy ultimately from the sun. This is simple. Other ideas, are more complicated, and if you were to immerse yourself, as I didn't do because it was too complicated, into a course in biochemistry where they talk about metabolism and where you get your energy, I was advised to not take that course as a student. Actually, it was a young faculty member. I was just sitting in a course taught by a well-known professor who was very clear, and I sat in on the first part that dealt with proteins and such, and it was interesting. And I was advised to not sit in the second part. It was about biochemistry and energetics, and it was so complicated that basically it's a memorization of numerous steps in a very complicated process that's not completely understood. So you take your choice. If you have to choose one, which would you choose? Well, Occam's razor would lead me to go in the direction of the electrical energy from water. It's really simple. Of course, it's just a conjecture on my part. I have no evidence that that's the case, but you embarrass me by forcing me to take a position. So there you go.
Oh, well,
As any good interviewer would do.
I appreciate. I really like in the book you do a out on a limb meter.
Yes, out on a limb.
That's great.
Yeah, well, there are some ideas presented in the book that are, maybe a little bit less certain than others, and there's no better way than to admit that, I'm not sure about this one, but it's an idea to throw out, and people can consider it if they like, and otherwise not. So I'm sticking with this. I've got 3 books coming, and that's another story. And I will continue to use those icons, out on the limb icons, courtesy of my son, who is a professional artist, who is, well, anybody who even thumbs through the 4th phase book will see that. He's really gifted, but he's so busy remodeling his house right now that it's difficult to get him to finish what I've been preparing. So, please.
Before we move on from ATP, I just wanted to get your opinion on, clearly it's at least associated with energy production. Do you think that the high negative charge on the phosphate group is sort of a nucleating site for this easy water?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're really well read in all of this stuff, and you obviously think a lot. And the idea actually came from Gilbert Ling, who what he referred to as a cardinal adsorbent. And the idea was, if you've got this a phosphate group and you have water nearby, the phosphate group would help to organize the structure, help to build it. And our view is a little different from Gilbert's view. Gilbert's view is a stack of dipoles lining up. That was the structure that he was talking about. And we found it was wrong because it's neutral. And we found through our experimentation that this region is not neutral. Typically, it's negatively charged. So the dipole idea couldn't fit. And that thereby we came upon a different kind of structure. So sorry, I'm going astray. What was your original question on that?
I just wanted to know what you thought ATP's role was.
Oh yeah.
And
so it's something like Gilbert's idea, where you've got a phosphate and the structure builds from the phosphate. We also have evidence that the structure builds from phosphate groups, from sulfate groups, from typically if you have for example, a protein with those charge groups on there, easy water will grow very readily, or gel. It doesn't matter. If you have those groups on there, then the easy water will grow, just as Gilbert Ling suggested that the dipoles will grow. So yeah, I think that Gilbert was correct, and that those are, as he says, cardinal adsorbent sites, adsorbing water. But actually, I think sites of buildup of easy water. That's where it all starts.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, I guess the burning question is drinking easy water the best thing to do? And if so, how will I know whether I'm drinking water that's being structured? And one thing I wanted to know is if you've got a cup, is the water that's touching the surface of the cup nucleating, and then what's happening as you drink it?
Oh, you asked 5 questions at the same time.
I'm sorry. Answer one.
I don't. Well, the answer to your last question is I don't know. It depends on the surface. It depends on what kind of surface. Glass is not glass. There are many different kinds of glass, and also glass has a tendency to build impurities on the surface. So it's not, the glass is not so-called clean. The water, when the water lies adjacent to the glass, it's not lying adjacent to the glass per se. It may be lying adjacent to some film that's covering the glass. And we do have actually some experiment, not many, because we did pursue it, where we took a region of a glass slide, and the glass itself wouldn't create any structure, but a region of the glass that was very thoroughly cleaned with aqua regia and some other cleaning agents that really do the job. We could see in a clean region that the easy water actually grew. I doubt, unless you're unusually fastidious, which you might be, because I see that room is awfully clean and neat where you're sitting. So maybe you are, but in most cases, glass is not clean glass, and it won't do that. And your cup, I think, is probably moderately clean, but not all that clean. And so I can't tell you whether it will or not. But another place that easy water tends to grow is at the air-water interface. So right at the top of your glass, it tends to build. It also builds next to or around some substances that are dissolved in the water, for example, like salts. Will do that. And it also builds, if you inject one way or another negative charge into the water from an electrode, it'll build right at the tip of that electrode. So there are various ways that that this water can build. And going back to the first part of your question, which was about the health benefits of drinking easy water and how do you know if you're drinking it or not drinking it? Well, okay. So how do you know if you're drinking it or not drinking it? We have a test, and we found that substances that build easy water. If you have easy water, a certain fraction of the water that you're drinking is easy water. If you put it into a spectrometer and measure the absorbance of light at different wavelengths, then if there's easy water, the water will absorb at a wavelength of 270 nanometers. And the more easy water you have in your glass of water, the bigger the absorption peak. So it's a semi-quantitative measure of how much, whether you have easy water and how much you have. And if you find no absorption at 270 nanometers, then you have no easy water. At least that's what we've found in the past, and we use that as a measure. So if ever you or your friends or colleagues or whatever want to test the water, all you need is a spectrometer. And every chemistry department and any university will have one, and many other laboratories will have it. It's almost as common as a pH meter. So you put the sample into a little container, a cuvette made of quartz, and you shine the light through different wavelengths, and you see if there's an absorption peak, and then you know if you have it. So there are lots of companies now producing all kinds of waters. People are concerned now about the water that they drink, and many of them tout the water is structured or easy water or fourth phase water. The companies are proliferating and do this. We have nothing to do with those companies. They just like the idea of easy water. They've, I guess, become convinced that easy water is good for health, and for a general reason that is sort of almost obvious. If your cells are filled with easy water, ordinarily you want to make sure they're filled with easy water. Otherwise, your cells are not going to be functioning the way they're supposed to function if they don't have a full complement of easy water. So anything that you can do, or I can do, or you do it better than I do it, I think. Anything you can do to make sure that your cells are filled with easy water should be good for health. That's the general, how should I say, theorem, if you will, or understanding that we've come to, and it fits a good deal of evidence. So if you look back at even very old evidence, there are certain substances, certain things that you do, or substances that are part of your life that you know are good for health, and it turns out that many of those things that you do or eat, take in, or experience build easy water. And we tested that. We came up with a half dozen or so simple expedients that you can use to build easy water in your body and confer good health. The first one is the most obvious one, and that's drink a lot of water. The water goes in, some of it goes out, but some of it gets converted to easy water. And remember, what you need to get converted to easy water, you need hydrophilic surfaces, and your body is just full of them, and you need energy. The energy is mostly infrared energy or heat. Infrared energy is coming from all over around you. You can't get rid of it unless you go to measures so extreme that there's no life left. Or you get it from inside your body because you're metabolizing and generating heat. And that heat coming from the core of your body can be used to build easy water in all the cells of your body. So it's the first one. The second one is a shortcut. You can bypass the step of getting the water that you drink converted to easy water. Just drink easy water. And so that's what we were just talking about. If you find waters that do genuinely contain easy, you're one step ahead of the game. If you can do that. And one way of doing that, a good way, is to do juicing. And perhaps you're familiar with that. My late wife used to do that to keep me healthy. You go to backyard, you take some plants that are growing, you pull the leaves on some of the plants. These are freshly springtime, early summer, healthy plants, and you put them into a machine that just eviscerates those plants and squeezes out the water and drink the water. And the reason for doing that is if you were to eat the whole plant itself, you get filled up very quickly. Wouldn't taste very good either. So what you do is squeeze out the water. Now, what is that water? It's the water from inside the cells of the plants, right? It's just full of easy water, just like your cells, being a healthy guy, filled with easy water. But the plant has even more, because the plant's electrical potential of the inside of plant cells is much more negative than inside of animal cells. So there's a lot of easy water inside, and you're drinking it. And so some of the websites of people who deal with health and such tout this kind of drinking of this kind of plant water as being the simplest expedient that you can use to promote good health. And I've spoken to various health providers. In this country, we call them alternative health providers because anyway, many of them say this is the simplest expedient for obtaining or maintaining good health. And I can understand why. You're basically drinking easy water, and the easy water is refilling your cells, cells that happen to be deficient and therefore not operating properly, not doing what they're supposed to do in the best way. Like your muscles, for example, you play 2 matches of tennis, you're dead to the world, you drink some water, and you're hydrated again, and that's what you need to regain some energy. But if you were to drink water that contains easy, my guess is, and I'm sure some are drinking it right now, in Tokyo maybe, my guess is that the muscles would be working better than they would be working otherwise, as would the other cells in your body. So those are two expedients. Another one is sunshine. You have no shortage of it where you are. That's why you look so healthy, I'm sure. The sunlight is doing that. Sunlight half the sunlight roughly is infrared. Infrared builds easy water. You go out in the sunshine, you expose yourself to the sun, it builds easy water throughout your body. Where I live in Seattle, in the wintertime, it's gray. And when the sun pops out, everybody seems happy. And the usual explanation is some kind of psychological effect. But it may not be, it may be, that could be part of it. But another explanation is that the infrared energy is penetrating throughout your body, especially your head. You're exposing it to the sun. And some of the wavelengths of infrared penetrate deeply through your skull and get into your brain. And we know that because you can actually use some of those wavelengths to image your brain. So it means the energy gets in and comes out again. So obviously it goes through your skull. So that could be the reason. It could be that your brain is bombarded with energy. That energy builds easy water. Your brain cells, nerve cells are working properly, and you feel your headache is gone, your depression is gone. You go back into the default state, which is feeling good, that we were designed to feel good. And then the fourth one is the extreme of that, the extreme being a sauna. And I don't know in Australia how popular these are. No, I would guess not. Have you ever been in one?
No, I mean I've got my own infrared lamps.
Okay.
that double as a sauna, but yeah.
Yeah. So the infrared lamps, there's so much information now. Someone sent me a review article of 4,000 references that talk about light therapy, and many of them are talking mostly about red and infrared light that is good for so many things. And of course, you know my explanation for it. The reason that these saunas work is that it's extreme heat, whether it's damp heat or dry heat, almost doesn't matter. You receive the heat, the infrared builds easy water in your body, and you walk in with muscle pains and headaches and depression, and you come out feeling like $1 million. So I think that's why it works. Okay, so those are four. Now, two more. One of them has to do with the substances that you take into your body, and it's known from Ayurvedic times, 5,000 years ago, that certain herbs and spices are good for health, and that information has been transmitted generation after generation after generation, and it's only in the past 50 years or so that we have begun losing that information. But it's coming back again. People are beginning to realize that some of these substances really are good for health. Take, for example, turmeric. And that has been known since Ayurvedic times. It's good for health, and it's good for so many different aspects of health. So when you think about it, again, going back to Occam's razor and the idea of simplicity, you could think that, well, if it's true that really that turmeric is so good for your health, either it has 30 different receptors throughout your body that receive turmeric and do something to the particular cell that those receptors are attached, or there's one mechanism that's operative throughout your body, 30 different places. Of course, the second one is simpler than the first, and if there's any substance that you can think of that's everywhere, it's water. So we got the idea, is it possible that the reason why turmeric and other substances I mentioned is so good for your health that when you eat it, it builds easy water? So we did experiments on that. We added turmeric to our usual system of building easy water next to a gel or next to some polymers and such. We just added, of course, in measured amounts of turmeric, and we found that at the same concentration that you might have in your body after eating food containing turmeric builds easy water. And so we found it's not just turmeric. We tried basil as well, so-called holy basil, same same result. We tried aspirin, which, you know, is a natural substance coming from the bark of the willow tree. Same thing. And we tried 6 or 7 different substances. We published it. And every one of the substances that is touted as being good for health, they all showed buildup of easy water. So it makes sense to me, and I think to some other people, that these substances, again, known for thousands of years, but, you know, modern medicine prefers pharmaceuticals, makes good money for the pharmaceutical companies. Everybody's happy, except for the side effects that sometimes include death. But these simple substances that have been known from ancient times, and I'm sure there are many more of them that we haven't tested, and I bet they fall into the same category. At the same time, by the way, when we did these studies and published them 2 or 3 years ago, and ghee, especially, that ghee forms, you know, clarified butter forms the biggest EZs that we've seen from any natural substance, almost a millimeter in size, huge, amazing. We also tried a poison. We expected that the poison would do the opposite. So what poison would you try? And we tried glyphosate. You know about glyphosate, but your listeners, this is the stuff in Roundup. I don't know what it's called in Australia. It might have a different
called
name.
Roundup, yeah.
A Roundup, yeah. And so you know, the plants that you're growing are modified, so they're not sensitive to Roundup. You spray the Roundup. It kills the weeds all around the plant. And since your plant, your corn or whatever you're growing, is no longer sensitive to this weed killer, it grows just fine, but the weeds get killed. And then you eat this food, but you're eating not only the food, but you're eating the Roundup, or the glyphosate, the main substance. And since you've had Stephanie Seneff being interviewed, she's probably world's expert on that subject. So we tried it, and at every concentration we tried, from high concentrations down to the lowest conceivable concentration, always diminished easy water. And so, at least for that particular poison, weed killer poison, right? It's expected, based on the results of our experiments, to diminish the amount of easy water in our body. And if I might go on there, and you know, a conjecture is that other poisons might act in a similar way. I've been a little reluctant to test them because mostly these tests are done by young undergraduate students, and they're not so experienced. And I feel a little reluctant to expose them to arsenic and to some of the other common poisons. So we haven't done those experiments yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if many of the poisons are poisons because of what they do to the water. And the water is central to everything the cell does. So if you don't have the easy water, your cells will not be working. And there's one more, but...
so I just wanted to jump in. How about saliva? I've made a habit of letting the water sit in my mouth and interact with the saliva, because I had the thought that maybe it was structuring the water in my mouth. Am I wasting my time, or?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. It's a really good question.
I just thought, because saliva is full of, you know, enzymes and proteins, that maybe that would be a great nucleating place for the easy water. So I've never thought to really structure it before I drink it. I try and structure it in my mouth and then swallow it. Do you think that's conceivable?
Well, you look awfully healthy to me, and so I'd say, well, think about it for a moment. You know, so many of the homeopathic preparations that you take, you put under your tongue, hold them there, whether liquid or solid form. And the idea is it gets into your system in a better way, or more effectively. But another interpretation could be exactly the one you're talking about, that that the aqueous solution of saliva are probably already structured to a large extent itself, because it has this slimy feel to it and viscous feel to it, which is what we expect of easy water. And I would guess that the saliva itself is very well structured, but if you add additional water, I don't see with the heat energy and the nucleation sites, I think you could be on to something really important. I mean, really important. I guess I might put my out on the limb meter there, but I wouldn't stick my neck out too far on that one. I think it's likely that you're onto something that could be really true. If you could do some experiments and try that, see if you could validate, it would be really interesting, because such a simple expedient, and that could be what it's doing to the homeopathic solutions too. It's basically building easy water that contains information from the homeopathic substance. We haven't talked about that, and I don't know if you're interested in talking about that, but we can if you are.
Well, yeah, since we're going down that path, I wanted to ask you about some things you talked about before about intentions, and you've had people focus their positive energy into a vial of water, and it changes the structure. Can you? Am I onto?
Yeah, you're onto something that may turn out, I think, to be a frontier area in science in the future. Right now, it's considered to be a fringe area, or an area replete with idiocy and crackpotism. But I think there's something real that's going on there, and that I guess it all started with the work of Masaru Emoto, whose work you probably know of. I'm not sure how many of your listeners do. He was a spiritualist, not a scientist, and nothing he did was scientific. So many people object to the kind of results that I'm going to mention, and for good reason, because their results need to be repeated using more scientific approaches. But I think they may be onto something that's really important there. And they found that if they took a beaker of water and put intention to it, positive intention, meaning I love you, or thinking positive thoughts, and they freeze the water, the crystals that form are beautiful crystals. And if they're thinking the opposite, and oh, the world out there is just nasty and ugly, and I hate it, and I hate you, and I hate everything around me, freeze the water, you get ugly crystals. And the problem is they would freeze 50 little petri dishes filled with one kind of water and 50 dishes with the other, and pick out the ones that showed what they wanted to show most clearly. It doesn't mean the others didn't show it, but they picked the ones that showed it. And so they have gotten a reputation as, this as being unscientific, but this has been repeated by so many people with actually similar results, and other groups using slightly different methodologies, but getting also similar results. And so there's really good reason to think there's something to it. But it goes beyond that. I mean, this is the concept is the water contains information, subtle energies coming from you, coming from what you're thinking or feeling. And it could be that the two of us are communicating in that way through subtle energies. Someone may walk into your room and start chatting with you, but there's more than just, you receive information beyond just what the person is saying, right? There's a kind of feeling that you get about the person who's there, a kind of subtle feeling. And you may sense something from that feeling, and you're picking up that information somehow, and nobody understands how. But experiments have been done by various people that demonstrate that there's a kind of energy not well understood that's emanating from that visitor to you. And it comes from the water. The water, and I think it comes from the easy water, because easy water is like a crystal, and crystals store information, just like crystals of silicon that are in your laptop computer or your cell phone. They store information. And so it is very likely, from all the studies that I've seen, there have been quite a few. We organize each year in Germany the annual conference on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water. And this is number 15 coming up. And each year, there'll be 2 or 3 presentations, each person using a different method, and they come to the same conclusion. The water contains information, memory. And some people's careers have been cut short because they claim to have evidence about that. One doesn't know whether the reason that his lives were cut short is cut short for standard medical reasons or something beyond, because these people were espousing something really radical. And it seems, based on the evidence that I've seen, that there really is something to it. And so right now, we ourselves in my laboratory, which I run at the University of Washington in Seattle, are doing experiments. And so we have people who claim to be healers, who have healing power, who can impart their energy to sick people and make them better. And we've recruited, so far we've done, I think, 5 or 6 rounds of experiments, and we have not analyzed the data yet. So I can't tell you whether the results will be positive or negative, but I'm kind of got my fingers crossed. So they sit beside a beaker of water, and they impart healing energy to the water itself. And we measure the physical properties of the water just before they start, and then after they start, and then for some days after as well, to see if there's a change in the water. I'm not sure yet. There are some hints that there are some changes, and if so, not sure yet, we will have then positive evidence that healers have some capacity through subtle energies to change the structure. We're measuring all kinds of 5 different methods to measure the structure of the water, that some aspect of structure is changed. So I don't know if it's true or not, but we'll be, and next on the agenda is healers who do remote healing, who claim to have powers, be able to do exactly the same thing, but from 5,000 kilometers away. It seems preposterous. How, you can't imagine such a thing, but yet there are many reports that this works. And I've got to admit that I have a Chinese healer who's working with me right now, who I'm in Seattle, he's in Toronto. He's a famous healer, and I wrenched my back because I lifted some heavy laundry from the clothing dryer, and I did it the wrong way. And if you've ever had back pain, they, on a scale of 10 to 1, where 10 is the highest, they can be 11. It's really, really painful. So they've been working with me on an almost daily basis, and my pain is, now it's gone, and they're still sort of doing final touches. So we, in the future, want to test healers such as Master Shah, who's doing this, and his colleagues, who often will heal mass groups of 5,000 people or 7,000 people in one shot, claiming actually it works better with many people. So at any rate, those experiments have not started, but we're interested enough to pursue those experiments, because if it's true, it's so interesting. It goes beyond anything that we know about physics and chemistry right now, because all of the energies that we know about, they diminish with distance as 1 over the distance squared, sometimes in certain situations, 1 over the distance cubed. And so you go a certain distance and the energy is so much diminished that there's practically nothing there. And so if you sent from Australia to me in Seattle, no way. But there have been experiments, published experiments, demonstrating that healers or focusing intention from 10,000 miles distant can have an impact. So yes, I think that the idea that water can store information or have memory is a cogent idea that has experimental basis and also theoretical basis. Theoretical because easy water is pretty much like computer memory in that the atoms are regularly organized and they can take on different states, just like transistors can be on or off. The oxygens can have up to 5 different states, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. So all of this is as exciting as you can imagine, at least for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the implications,
so
if you're right, are so huge because, you know, we're about 70% water by weight. And if you can change what that water is doing just by, you know, loving someone, that's pretty huge.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel the same as you do. You know, the evidence is not entirely in, but it's very promising. And more people are getting interested in so-called consciousness and how this works. And if you're, I don't know if you've ever had Rupert Sheldrake on one of your programs, but he's the master of all this.
We must have been connected because I was just about to ask you about Rupert's work with using vibrations with water. I know he's been studying water recently. What do you think about his work with using vibrations and how might that translate to music? Like we listen to music and we get huge emotional reactions from music. Could it be acting through water?
Well, yeah, it could be acting, and it reminds me of the and he's done and published experiments. In fact, he's come to our conference to talk about it, our water conference. And if you think about for example, do you know about the Tibetan bowls? What are they called?
Yeah, I do.
What's the critical word that I'm missing? Tibetan.
The crystal sound bowls.
They hum or they vibrate.
Yeah.
So and we studied them in the laboratory, by the way,
right.
Somewhat. So you've got a fairly large, thin bowl. And you fill it with water and you start rubbing the edge either with your finger or the wet finger, which I've done personally, or with some instrument or such, and it begins humming. And the humming gets louder and louder. It's like almost like chanting. And it's known, depending on the frequency, various people who are healers of sorts use various size and shape thickness of bowls to produce different frequencies, which are said to have good impact, positive impact on health. And the one thing that I remember more than the impact on health was what happens after about 30 seconds. And I found this so astonishing. It was at a museum where they had one of these bowls in Germany, and someone took me to the museum. It was a charming little place, and they had one of these bowls filled with water. And I was there with my late wife, and we both had a chance to do it. And so you wet your finger, you start rubbing. And as you start rubbing around, the sound gets louder and louder. And suddenly, the water starts dancing. And you have little droplets from that run from this bowl of water upward. It's like upside down rain. The droplets go up, and then they come back down again. And as long as you do this, they keep doing it. So that interested us more at the time than the healing properties. And we came upon some theoretical reasons why that might happen, which I won't bore you with, but it's sort of like a champagne glass where the bubbles come from single points. I don't know if you've ever seen that. The people who make the champagne glasses, they create asperities at certain places, and the bubbles all form at those asperities, and they go right up, and you ask yourself, how is that possible? There are bubbles coming from nowhere else. but they all come from those single unique points, one after another, and the same thing in the bowl we found in the Tibetan singing bowl, I think they're called. So yes, sound is important, and actually, the Moto people began using sounds. They were exposing water to music, and if it was John Lennon, they froze the water, and the crystals were beautiful. And if it was, well, you can imagine certain kinds of rock music, it was not as beautiful as yeah. So yeah, sound, absolutely. And just one more point with regard to sound is growth. And it, again, probably has something to do with the water. I was in China, and I was listening to a scientific presentation by a group of young scientists, and they also were interested in sound, the effect of sound on plant growth. They went into the forest. They chose two regions that were similar in all ways that they could imagine it. And one group of plants, they had a speaker and they played music, and the other one, it was silent. The one with the music grew much taller than without the music. So something is going on. You brought up the issue of sound, and I think sound energy, somehow the energy is impacting the water, and more experiments have yet to be done. But the water seems to be a wonderful receptor of information of all sorts, from light information to sound information to subtle energy kind of information that nobody understands yet.
Yeah, cool. Keeping with that sort of vibe, you mentioned you didn't have a phone. I wanted to talk about EMF's impact on water and the impacts that will have on human health.
We did, well, first of all, first I must mention the book by Arthur Furstenberg called The Invisible Rainbow. You've read it.
Yeah.
The guy is, I don't know how he's had the patience to put together an enormous amount of evidence that electromagnetic energy in general has negative impact on our health, going back more than 100 years, correlating new advances in electrical, mostly communications, power lines and such, with pandemics that occurred just as they came out. I couldn't believe all the information I was reading.
Yeah.
So I had heard from many sources about cell phones and the dangers that the kind of energy that's used in cell phones might pose. And we were curious about the effects on that might be mediated through water. And we did experiments, and the experiments have just been submitted for publication probably a few days ago by, hopefully he submitted it, an undergraduate student who's now returned to Korea. And we found, so we have a little chamber in which we have some material surface and water, and the EZ grows, and we could look at and measure the size of the EZ because the EZ excludes particulate matter, and we put particulate matter, little spheres, in the chamber, and you can see that they're missing from this region. And we exposed this to a router from a cell phone, and we found in the experiments that the size of the EZ, when we turned on the router, it was diminished by something like 15%, 15 to 20%. Of course, we can't know for sure whether the same happens in the body, but if the same happens in the body, then it's not cool because we need easy water in our cells. And so, so you think about Ted Kennedy with cell phone next to his ear all the time and getting brain cancer. There's not necessarily a linkage, but it's hard to avoid thinking of that kind of linkage. So I think this is important, and And so many of my colleagues have been talking about 5G now. I'm not sure if you've got it yet in Sydney. You're probably ahead of us. We've got it here, and the wavelengths that are used are the same wavelengths that have been used in the past as weapons, and so raises some question about the safety that's involved, and I have a bunch of colleagues who are actively involved in that. I'm not myself, who have been reporting that this is as great a danger, or greater than many of the other environmental factors that are impairing our health. I hope they're wrong, because this is coming on really strong, but judging from the results that we obtained in the laboratory with ordinary Wi-Fi, not 5G, could be a problem. So did I deviate from responding to your question?
Yeah, well,
on target?
One of the things I really wanted to ask you, you did a great presentation about weather and water's role in weather and how we don't particularly understand it yet. It got me thinking, if electromagnetic radiation is affecting the structure in water, could the continuing rising level of this electromagnetic soup that we're living in be affecting weather patterns? I mean, we know that HAARP has been used for years to affect the weather. Do you think some of the extreme weather events we're getting could be caused by the huge amount of electromagnetic radiation that's sort of bathing the Earth right now?
Your questions are about as brilliant as any I've heard. I must compliment you.
Thank you.
You really think. It's difficult for me to respond to that because I haven't thought about it, but there is easy water up there, no doubt, in the clouds. So many interesting features of clouds and weather that we don't understand, and I'm hoping to contribute something to helping to bring some understanding. But it makes sense that it could easily that could easily be the case if I mean so the clouds. Forgive me for thinking out loud. The clouds consist of little droplets. The droplets 40, 50, 60 micrometers in size, sometimes much bigger. But this is typical. And we found, it's in the 4th phase of water book, that these little droplets contain EZ shells. So there's plenty of EZ in every cloud that you can think of. It's the reason why clouds have negative charge, and why they're up there, because they're repelled from the negative Earth, so they float. A lot of people never even gave a second thought to why clouds, which are built of water, should be hanging up there. You drop water from a pitcher and it goes right down. It doesn't stay up there, but the cloud stays up there. So if you were to bombard the cloud with electromagnetic energy of the right kind, if that kind disrupted EZ water, or enhanced EZ water, but particularly disrupted it, I could imagine it could have a distinct impact on the weather. Pardon me, I'd have to think through how it might work and the consequences, but I think you may be onto something that's really important. But I guess I need to say even more important, maybe not more important than that, but equally important is understanding how weather really works. And there's no coherent theory about how weather works. You just can't find it. Nobody says, okay, I theorize X and we go from X to Y to Z and then I explain everything from it. That doesn't exist. There's no, it's kind of ad hoc. If you got low pressure, then probably it's going to rain, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's not really a theory that you can build on. There's no central theory. And So I've been trying to develop something, and it will be in the next book that I'm about to publish, if I can get my son busy doing the artwork, and he's too busy finishing the renovation of his home. Ethan, if you're listening, the book is essentially done. It deals with weather. I've got, I think, 4 chapters, and I do my best to explain. And I think there may be some valid points in there about understanding the etiology of weather, ranging from drizzle to hurricanes and tornadoes and all. But okay, so I'm just blabbering on and on. I can summarize by saying I think you're onto a good point.
Right. Okay.
Very important.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you're working on a sort of like a desalination sort of thing by using the thin strip of easy water to get clean water from maybe unpure water. Am I characterizing that correctly?
You are. Yeah. We're trying to, a whole bunch of shall we say, prospective technologies have arisen from the fundamental work that we've done. Everything we do in the laboratory at the university it's not oriented toward, shall we say, commercial, if you use the expression, products. It's fundamental research. And one of my students 5 or 6 years ago said to me, Jerry, we should form a company. And my first response was, no way. I got too many things to do, and I'm not interested in commercial aspects. What really moves me is the science and the understanding. He said, "Oh, you won't have to do anything. I'll do everything." Well, it didn't turn out that way exactly, and the company has been pursuing pursuing several things. One of them is indeed filtration. Another, I'll explain in a moment. Another one is desalination. And the third one is getting electrical energy from water. And we made substantial progress in some of those endeavors, but it's been difficult for us to get enough investment in that. There are questions that remain unanswered. And in order to go from a laboratory demonstration, which we've done in all of those, to something practical, you have to cross the so-called valley of death, which is known among entrepreneurs who do that. It's a deep valley, and to go from the laboratory demonstration, you have to cross over that deep valley, and a lot of things fall in. Don't ever get out across to the other side where you have technologies available to the world. And some of these technologies are world-changing, and this is really what prompted me to say, yes, let's do it, because the world needs electrical energy. So, of course, if you can get electrical energy from the sun and the separation of charge that I mentioned to you, it's a no-brainer. Of course, you should do it if you can develop a practical. We've demonstrated it in the laboratory. We can make a light bulb light, but going from there to something practical is a challenge. Also, we spent a lot of time on filtration, and we found that the results were often very good. We could filter out pretty much anything that you could imagine. The principle is really simple because the water comes in, and that water gets converted to EZ, and it gets converted to EZ. It pushes out all the junk that you want to get out of the water, and then you collect that, and that water should be not just pure, but actually it's EZ water that is coming out, which is good for health. So it has every benefit. And a lot of the results we got were really good, but sometimes it didn't work as we hoped. And what that means is stepping back and figuring out what you need to do to make it work more consistently, because you can't, a device is useless if it works 50% of the time. You don't know which 50% of the time, or even 90% of the time. And so, it's a challenge to do that. And also, the ultimate goal is to get rid of the salt as a, quote, contaminant. We should be able to do that in theory. We started doing it. We had some promising results, but most of the results were not good enough even to report. So we're still at the primitive stages. And what you get from that is you can take ocean water and convert it into drinking water. Imagine if you can do it successfully and consistently. Well, of course you can do it. You can do it by reverse osmosis, but the amount of energy that's required to do that is humongous. And so it works in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia, where in fact there are no rivers or lakes or anything. It's where they get their water because they can afford it. But for the rest of us, it's unaffordable. But imagine if you have a system now that uses water and sunlight. Essentially, that's it, next to the right kinds of surface. And out of that, you get water for drink. What a revolution that would be. And so we're inspired. This is not what you would call an operation designed to make money, or because that, obviously you need to do something to keep the company going, but the goal is to do something for the world that the world needs badly. And the world needs drinking water really badly, whether through desalination or through filtration. And it needs electrical energy. And so all of these are possible, and there's more, with technologies that could be developed from the fundamental research that we've done on water. And this is exciting. My own passion is in the science, not the technology. I started as an engineer. I should be doing technology, but the science is so incredibly exciting that I just can't take my mind away from it. So yeah, long answer to another short question.
No, it's great. I wanted to get an update because I hope you keep working on it, because it seems like it could be such a game changer in energy and in getting clean water as well.
I think it could be, but one needs the investment in order to, well, you understand that.
Yeah. I'd like to be conscious of your time. I know you're probably very, very busy, so we might finish things there, given that you've answered everything that I've asked so well.
Okay, well, thank you. I wish I had infinite time, because your questions are so powerful, so interesting, and so creative. But I do need to go. And it's been a great pleasure. I hope we have a chance to meet in person. I hope to be coming to Australia to give a series of lectures. I was to have come just around now, I think it was, or was it exactly 1 year ago? Can't remember, but pandemic issues have prevented. Yeah.
Well, so, please let me know if you're coming over, because that would be amazing.
Yeah, and you can take me on tour of Sydney.
That would be great. I'd love
Such a beautiful city.
Yeah.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Cameron. It was my pleasure, and good luck to you.
Awesome. Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode with Gerald Pollack. I'm still processing the fact that I got to do this with one of my all-time heroes. I can't encourage you enough to read his books, Cells, Gels and the Engines of Life, and especially his book, The Fourth Phase of Water. These books are going to be absolute classics in the coming decades, I'm sure of it. If you want to keep up to date with the podcast and all the other work that I'm doing, you can follow me on social media using @RicciFlowNutrition. I have heaps of guests planned for the very near future, so thanks for listening.